Um, Thanks again, and I just wanted to thank everybody for welcoming me to participate. It's been really interesting following one system, trying to grapple with all these issues, which all your colleagues in the rest of the country are also struggling with and trying to figure out. So it's been a really interesting glimpse for me. I write for our technology section and also for our Wired Campus blog, where a lot of these issues are discussed. So, and without any more delay, I'm going to just ask the panelists to present some of their key takeaways from the day. And I was hoping if we could just focus it a bit on really looking at what this means for a 31-state public institution, because I really like the panelist who said earlier about, if you're not Harvard or the most famous university in the planet with $60 million to just throw away and do whatever you want, what does this really mean for public higher education and a public higher education system? Can you dive into that?
Thank you. I think we're on now. Thank you very much, Mark. I think you're exactly right that the opportunity to be able to leverage our ample resources, but scarce resources. And I say all that, we've got a lot to be very proud of, whether you're looking at research, teaching, or service components. But we heard nothing is free, whether it's time, effort, commitment, money. Going forward, there's something to be said for we can do a lot more with 310,000 FTE and roughly 40,000 faculty and staff FTE. And then maybe if we can align those same assets against some of these other systems and partner across systems, that's where you can really start moving the needle in terms of opportunity, cost, and the like. I do think that one of the reasons that we feel like there is some urgency to thinking as a system about this, again, I'll go back to that population that we know that we're not reaching with our current efforts. I mean, it's significant. Just the 1.2 million Georgians with some college no degree, a lot of those are some of our former students. They are folks that are in academic good standing, and finding some way to reconnect with them, I think it's going to take collaborative multi-campus within the system opportunities to be able to do that. It's hard to see, again, just knowing the tough decisions that each of your campuses I know are having to make on a day in, day out basis, how any one of you can probably do that alone. Certainly a few might be able to strike out on their own, but we can certainly do a lot more partnering across systems and then partnering within the system. So that's my
Do you mind if I just jump in with a question? I'm sorry, on the why of that. Why MOOC if you're talking about reaching those people? Why is a MOOC the appropriate avenue as opposed to the many other ways that you might try to get them?
Well, I'll go back to, again, this morning I made mention of the fact that we know that with our current pricing structure, just the cost barrier that exists for students. If there is an opportunity for us to think about taking apart both the delivery, the supports, the assessments, the non-academic supports that surround that, and perhaps do that, come up with a cost structure. That was one of the groups talked about that, to where if the cost structure is driven down to where we can get to more of an affordable price point. I've joked about some of this is about stripping back and going back to what a 1950s state college might have been in terms of access opportunities. We didn't have a lot of climbing walls. We didn't have a lot of other things. That the debt service is amazing that fees go toward paying down. When you really start talking about something that is about the one-on-one of the student with the content, the taking of the courses, the programs, and not all the other things that get into that cost structure of modern higher education, there may be an opportunity to be able to find a cost-effective, affordable price point. We know that more and more students are just they're averse to loans. There is not a lot of need-based aid in Georgia. That's a problem that we talked about earlier this morning. We cannot just continue to lay fee upon fee in front of students and not think that that's going to impact both participation as well as success in being able to matriculate through programs. It's one thing to move through a one-year certificate. It's a whole other thing to move through a 120-hour run if you don't have the type of disposable income or the type of aid structure to be able to support you.
We actually, just to build on that, we talked a little bit about that in the faculty roles conversation, and I don't think it's just MOOCs, right? The conversation today has gone in and out of MOOCs and technology and things like that, and Houston, I like how you break down the component of, well, if the goal is that, getting to the 65% or the 1.2 million, some of those, it's a scale play, and we need the MOOCs for an affordable way to get there. Some of it is take this technology, and I think it was Dr. Schatz that was talking about, what if we just use that as an excuse to improve the work we're doing right now as different tools there, which can actually help with the graduation rates of the students you're currently losing in the 4-year and 2-year colleges right now. So I think it's a little bit of both, and it's starting with the student need and working backwards to the technology.
I think with MOOCs, one of the things that I've heard today is that it really represents, one thing that MOOCs represent is an opportunity to engage some of those learners before they get involved in debt. It's kind of the way that stores might do a loss leader almost. It gives people also a chance to try it out, think about it, see whether it's possible for them. So maybe the learner who is among the 90% that drop from a MOOC still has that experience of having tried college courses, and maybe he or she will come back and think about it more seriously next time. It's an investment for the future, I think, an investment for widening the access point.
I think what fascinates me is the idea of the and beyond piece. MOOCs have a role and a place, and I think we're all trying to sort of figure that out right now. But I think one of the great things that a state university system can do is it can help a lot of people start thinking about the long term and not just the short term being reactive. I think a lot of times we unfortunately get in a position where we're reacting to a lot of different external stimuli, whether that be student enrollments, whether that be the political winds at any given moment. But when you engage a university system, especially a statewide system as large as Georgia's, in this sort of conversation, then it gives everyone the space to do something that I think a lot of times in academia we don't have the chance to do. And that's think about what's it going to be like 10, 15, or 20 years down the road, and really engage not just in strategic planning, but strategic futuring, so that you begin to try to figure out how is it that what changes do we need to make now in order to be prepared for where we think all of this is going to go. And those are really big, hard questions that no single small group of administrators or faculty at a single campus can answer.
Can I ask you to play that out a little bit? Because I think that's a really good question for a very large public system. So say these changes take hold, what do you think that will mean for a large public system 10, 20 years down the line? Do you think, as some people have suggested, universities could go the way of Borders bookstores and, many of them will just go out of business, or what? If you talk about saving money, where is that savings coming from? Are there going to be less faculty members? Is that what is saving the money? Can you sort of be a bit more concrete?
Man, that's not loaded at all. Well, okay, so I'm a recovering faculty member for starter. So I don't think we're going to see faculty go by the wayside. And I don't think we're going to see brick and mortar go by the wayside.
So how do you save money then?
I think that here's what you have to balance. You're balancing affordability, but you're also balancing access. Public institutions should have at their heart the public good. And now sometimes the public good isn't cheap. But there are ways that we can, I think, as public systems, the institutions within those systems can create partnerships. Because when you think about it, we all tell our students that teamwork is a very important life skill. But I don't know that we always model that very well as multi-institutional systems of higher ed. And so when you think about, I think when a system approaches this sort of planning, then it can be thinking about how do we best leverage limited resources? Are there things that one school can do that other schools maybe can't do as well and then shouldn't do? It almost becomes a specialization. And so I think in the long haul, that is one of the ways that you begin to save. Brick and mortar's not going to go away. 18-year-olds, and I've heard this over and over today, and it's the conversation we have in Texas, traditional students, this isn't what they necessarily want, and it may not necessarily be the best thing for them. And as somebody pointed out, there's always going to be parents wanting to send their kids away someplace else. But for returning adults, this, I think, becomes really powerful access opportunities. Georgia may have 1.2 million adults with no college, or with college credit and no degree. Texas has over 3.6 million. That's actually not something we're proud of. So there's a lot of folks out there that we have to recapture because for some reason or another, we didn't do right by them the first time round. And this is the sort of thing that may provide access for them.
No, I would just build the other thing about that cost piece and saving money is just if you push that access through, your unit cost decreases by its very nature. You don't necessarily have to take faculty away from that equation. And so I think if we think about it in both directions, there's plenty of demand that's pent up that needs to be resolved.
I mean, I would say one of the things that's happened with especially the last 6 cycles, many of our campuses have had to respond to their budget reductions by doing things like forcing more and more students into sections, driving up student-faculty ratios, being able to having to rely more and more upon adjunct faculty. We've heard time and time again from a number of our campuses about how difficult it has been to be able to find adjunct to cover. I think that one of the things that is exciting, not about, staff get tired of hearing, it's not as the MOOCs are, but as we need the MOOCs to be. The opportunity to, again, think that wheel of all those things that go into teaching and learning and the construction of a high-quality teaching and learning experience, and how can we make changes to the program and to the course structure to where we can continue to still have high quality yet not sacrifice by just forcing more students into an old model at higher faculty to student ratios, or putting somebody, I mean, one of the things we're never going to do a better job of, here's where I'll absolutely defend that the faculty are going to be central to this. We are never going to do better than a seasoned faculty member in a classroom with all that they bring to the teaching and learning environment. But I do think that we'll probably be a little bit better than some of the faculty that are hired at the 11th hour as an adjunct. You found somebody, okay, you meet SACS qualifications, you stay 1 chapter ahead of the students and hold on for dear life until the holidays, and then we'll plan your course for the spring, and maybe we'll get a do-over. So we're never going to do better than the former. My bet is through some of these thinking about a restructured approach, especially with our regular full-time senior faculty leading the way, we can absolutely positively have some quality assurances, even in an era in which we're being asked to serve. I think that somebody talked about accommodating more students, but having more students succeed. The only way that we're going to be able to do that is to think about the way that we engage, the way we use the faculty expertise, the way we utilize the supports, the way we think about the out-of-class supports that need to be wrapped around that student to allow them to succeed. It's not going to be just pushing more students through a tube.
Something that Houston had said in his remarks that we all received before we came was that courses need to work for the lifestyles of the average Georgian. And I don't think that the average Georgian probably is an 18 to 22-year-old person from a home with wealthy parents or even moderate income parents necessarily. And I know from studies in other states that I'm familiar with that the population of students who are coming to our institutions, there will be students in that demographic, but the preponderance of the new students, the growth area, is those adult students, those first-generation college students and others who really do need these other kinds of approaches. And in order to get ready for them, the time to be continuing to work on it, I know that in Georgia there's already been a lot of work done. The time to continue and keep up with the way things are moving with MOOCs and other models beyond that is now.
Patrick, did you want to offer your takeaway from?
No, I think the question started a little bit with the system component and what's the opportunity for Georgia. And one thing that we have the opportunity to do at the Gates Foundation is see different states and what's happening. And I think from this morning's session, seeing some of the even pilots or in some cases people present them as experiments that were happening across the system is really encouraging, because when you think about doing any of these things at scale, that's going to be one of the first things you have to overcome is, okay, we mastered this within this one culture at this one institution. Now we have to have conversations, across the hall, across the state. And by doing that, by setting that design up intentionally is actually quite promising and not something everybody's doing. And so I think setting it up for, yes, we're piloting now, but as we take it a little bit further along to scale, actually puts you in a good spot.
And can I just follow up? So from your perspective, what does success look like, since you're funding these projects all over the country and watching all these pilots in different states? I know the Gates Foundation is known for being very focused on measuring and outcomes. I mean, what does success look like to you?
Well, success at the end of the day is more folks with meaningful degrees. And so you could argue that's a workforce issue, you could argue that's a civil rights issue, but that's the end result. Now, I think what we're talking about is one specific pathway to do that, and they've been talking about that in terms of measuring, in terms of, well, how many people are you reaching? But at the same time, we're having a conversation about Complete College Georgia, which is how many people are you actually getting across the line with meaningful degrees. And so I actually think it's the combination. Again, back to, if you look at that objective of the 1.2 million with some education at the higher education level but no degree, you say, well, you could break that down into different solutions. MOOCS may be a solution for some because it's an access issue. It may be a different issue for others. It may be integrated planning and advising systems while you're in the institution. We're not talking about that today, but that's another pathway we look at.
Would anyone from the audience like to join the conversation? I'd love to open it up at this point. We've heard from so many different speakers. If you have any questions you'd like to ask of the people on this panel, it's a good opportunity to speak up. Is there a microphone there? Nobody? Anything that concerned you in all the discussion that you had today? Anything that you're worried about that you want to raise? Go ahead, sir.
Will the higher DFW rates from MOOCS, will that penalize students? So will the institution be penalized for high DFW rates because of MOOCS?
Sorry, I'm not from Georgia. DFW is okay.
Well, let me say this. One of the things I mentioned this morning, that is absolutely positively what we don't need to do is enter into a situation where, let me make up a number, where we're just trying to cram 1,000 people into an experience and hoping that 100 come out the other end. That's not what we're talking about. One of the things that I've been excited about, the early conversations about thinking on some of your campuses about how you could maybe adapt existing courses or think about the gen ed strategies. It's been about utilizing a MOOC-like strategy to be able to maybe take a student population and see which of those students can handle that more self-directed, self-paced, open-ended sort of experience versus being able to use that to then steer students toward what is the best option for them. Maybe they do need the more hands-on, relationship-driven, one-on-one, more traditional approach. I would hope that we would absolutely positively, that's one of the things that I do hope in the analytics conversations, it should be about utilizing those analytics, whether we're talking about a traditional classroom or we're talking about something that's a MOOC experience, to earlier rather than later be able to know that we've got a student that's struggling in this medium and how can we steer them towards something at no penalty that is a better option for them. I personally, I guess if I can be removed and put somebody else, I do not want us to see some sort of 10% success rate being the goal for this. Matter of fact, I think that we've got to insist from the very beginning that if we're going to have new models that are going to be tested, the goal should be equal to, if not better, than the success rates of any other delivery mode, including our traditional in-class. To do anything else is all of you are going to be opened up for scrutiny for trying anything new anyway. So if you just automatically from the beginning say that that's going to be the standard success rate that we're going to shoot for, equal to or better than anything else in the system, that's probably a good working principle. So I hope that I meant to mention that this morning. I don't remember if I mentioned in my opening remarks.
I'm just worried about fiscal year 15 and
Yeah.
the change in formula funding.
One of the things about the formula, it's not going to, it is going to be more measuring productive enrollments, moving students, for instance, not just having record numbers of freshmen, but how many freshmen do you get to 15 earned hours, to 30 earned hours. So we're kind of calling that productive enrollments. And it also is going to be with an eye toward, as is appropriate among the institutions, access institutions, completion of certificate degrees and associate degrees and limited bachelors, and obviously the more selective institutions it'll be focused on bachelors and masters. I think that built into that formula is not going to be any arbitrary, here should be your retention target, because with retention rates and graduation rates, you can fudge the numerator and the denominator to move that around. I mean, what we need to be doing is improving upon your historical baseline, and if heretofore you've been getting X number of students to that sophomore plateau successfully, then building upon that. If a MOOC strategy, I like the point that it's just one tool among many. The guided pathways advising systems are things that you're also undertaking under consideration on your campuses to be much more intentional in the use of those tools. Those are also things that might contribute to moving more students, accelerating time toward the degree, as well as saving the students time and money.
Thanks for your question, though, because you raise a really interesting point. There's this interesting tension. On one hand, you're being told to innovate and try all new things, and on the other hand, the powers that be are increasingly looking at you and saying you really need to make your numbers, and now tying much more funding to performance. So that's a good point. Anyone else want to raise any concerns that have occurred to you today?
Is it going to be okay to fail? In other words, for a faculty member to try. Well, the question is it going to be okay to fail for a faculty member to try something different and it not work out and not be held against them when it comes up for promotion and tenure and review?
I have to say, so we're taking awfully big risks in the project that I'm working on, and I am extraordinarily grateful.
What's the risk?
Well,
For people who don't know as much about your project.
So we're working on a hybrid competency model bachelor's degree with two of our public institutions in Texas, and this is a different model in some ways. We're looking at doing it with fixed flat rate tuitions, which is definitely a different funding model than we've ever used before at these institutions. And it's risky for the institutions because it's expensive to create these sorts of programs. It's risky for the faculty because they're doing something that their colleagues aren't doing, and for those that aren't tenured yet, we've had conversations about how do we make sure that they're protected in the promotion and the tenure process. And fortunately, we have administrations at both of those schools that understand those issues and are dead set making sure that those faculty are rewarded in that process. But one of the things that I've been really grateful about, hasn't helped me sleep much at night, has been that we're one of the EDUCAUSE Next Generation Learning Challenge grants. And when we first met last summer after we had gotten the grant in Seattle at one of the Gates post-secondary convenings, the Gates Foundation evaluators sat us down and actually told us, we understand that there will be failures, and those are of value to us because that's the only way we're going to know what works and doesn't work. And I have to admit, I didn't really believe them at first, Patrick. I do now, because unceasingly, that's been the conversations that we've had with Gates and with EDUCAUSE, with Nancy. And I think it's all of the grantees, that there's an understanding that we're doing things and trying things, and that with any adventure like this, there will be successes and there will be failures. And I think it's the same thing for faculty. We have to make sure that if we have faculty own it, that they are allowed to take those risks. And we certainly know from the course redesign projects we ran in Texas that first semester that a redesigned course was taught, the student success rates were not that great. However, the longer it was taught and the more faculty professional development we put in place, the better those success rates got until they were way beyond what it was in the traditional courses. So it's a long game. It's not a short game.
I think the project that Barbara Hunt presented this morning, which is the project here in Georgia that's one of the Next Generation Learning Challenges project, is significantly different from the project in Texas, but it's also really interesting as something that you can look to in the state as a different way to work on some of the issues that are leading all of you to be considering MOOCs and beyond. And those issues are shortening the time to degree, reducing costs, using technology, serving non-traditional students. And I also think that Georgia's done something very interesting and smart in the way that those competency components are incorporated into a model that also has traditional time elements in it. So they're really, the folks who put that together, who were at the system and also at Columbus State, really have done something that takes a risk, that there's some investment behind, and that I think you can all be really interested in seeing what the outcomes are going to be.
I think that point about risk, we shouldn't leave that though, right? Because there's one thing for Gates to say to our grantees, oh no, if we evaluate this, it's okay if it doesn't work. It's a very different thing for a faculty member, whether they're pre-tenure or otherwise. And I think that the ask there really of the administration is to not only provide air cover and support, but also to incent that sort of behavior. Do you treat that as research? How do you, if that's an explicit goal to reach your end objectives, how do we create a system and supports to make sure that on a personal, professional level, that the people who are ultimately going to execute it are supported to do so?
Can I just, sorry, do you have a sense at this point of what roughly the quote-unquote failure rate would be for these projects? Because NGLC has existed now for several years and been through several waves of funding. So, I mean, I assume you've evaluated the projects that have gone before.
Right. We do have the Wave 1 projects, which were concluded. We are coming out with the evaluation for those that was done by the Gates Foundation evaluators. And we have a lot of results in the form of what the grantees have learned from those projects that were gradually
Anything you care to share to the audience and the readers of the Chronicle of Higher Education, hopefully?
I think that that first round of projects, the Wave 1 projects, were smaller in scale because what they were doing was looking at building blocks. They were looking at tools and at approaches that were ready to be scaled and that then went on to be scaled. And one of the things we learned is scaling something that isn't quite ready for prime time at the originating institution is really a tough deal. I think we heard today about the Emporium model. I think there were some really significant successes with the Emporium model in some of the projects, scaling to other campuses. There were also 2 projects that were really interesting in terms of providing amplified assistance as an instructional approach to students using technology to do some of the kinds of encouragement that people who are interested in student support think about. So I think we do have results beginning to come out from Wave 1, and with Wave 3B, which are these breakthrough models projects, I
That'll
think
take a while, I assume.
that'll still be another year at least before
Sure.
we know exactly how it's going.
One thing that I hope that those of you that maybe this is the first conversation that you've been in, or the first opportunity that you've had to kind of hear how some of the conversations within our system are going, I hope you are seeing that this is absolutely let's think carefully about how we move forward. Let's not just go off with risk. Let's talk about calculated risk. One of the things that I think with the Columbus State project, it was important that the Columbus State team knew that at the system level we were by their side and we had their back. I mean, it really was. That was a part of the message, whether it be with the faculty or the support team that are delivering that. Raphael Bras calling me, goodness, it was the end of last summer when they first started really looking at what they were doing in the MOOCS space. He said, now Houston, I need to talk with you about this. This is going to be a little different but we think this is worth being a part of. And then it really just became a part of dialogue back and forth between our team and the Georgia Tech team to make certain that, again, we could have their back. I think that the pre-calc course, I mean, that we're working with multiple campuses on, it really is. Dad always talked about, measure twice, cut once, son. That group has had that operating principle from the very beginning. I think thinking through, as opposed to there being some mandated, and I think there have been some perhaps tendencies in some other states to, let's just have a top-down, here's what is going to happen and how it has to happen, go make it happen. That's why we absolutely, from the start, we would rather have, here are 3 or 4 campuses that have an idea, it's built on an experience that they've already shared. How can we stretch the boundaries of that? And again, perhaps it becomes MOOC-like. Maybe it's just about course and program redesign principles that are, very much a decade on a part of what we do. But either way, we need calculated risk, not just hurly-gurly risk.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience like to ask a question? One in the back.
Come tomorrow, we're all going to head back to our respective campuses and inevitably be asked by colleagues, administrators, students, anybody, what is the current thinking on MOOCs in the state of Georgia? I was just wondering if the panelists would give us some advice as to how to frame all of this information without answering for an hour and a half.
Well, you probably won't be helped by saying, well, there are more questions than answers. I think that's a great thing. Here's one thing I personally hope that you'll see, that we absolutely do. We want this to be a dialogue about what these new tools can do to expand on who we can reach and how we can reach and how effective we can be at reaching those students. I hope that you'll take the message back that this isn't about, it's not a conversation about putting 10,000 students into a classroom. This really is about thinking about maybe some course and program, some sequence within program redesigns that may or may not be happening on any of the 31 campuses, but that's going to be about finding scale. Now, it's probably not just about just continuing to serve 20 students in a class, but it's definitely not about 10,000 either. What we really have to think through is, again, very carefully, where is that tipping point where the supports can be leveraged to serve more students and serve students in a way that makes a difference? Where might we be able to use that faculty expertise and that content and knowledge in a way that can reach more students and reach them in a way that we know that the content and the academic supports that are involved in delivering that program are of absolute highest quality, and we're going to find another way to look at the equation to be able to leverage other opportunities for scale. I hope that you'll send back to them that we want this group of 150 people to be indicative of the type of conversation that we need to get going with all roughly 1,000 of our faculty and staff, whether it be academic or non-academic. We're all in support of the mission of the institutions and the missions of the system.
So how would you boil that to 2 sentences for this man to take back to his colleagues?
Say we're looking at new models broadly defined. Within your program, there are academic disciplines where this may not make any sense, but there are also academic disciplines in this room that have said, you know what, I can see how the certificate option within our bachelor's program, that certification, there's a way where I heard something today about doing that in MOOC-like form. That makes sense. It's nice to know that we might have the leeway to be able to think creatively and innovatively about how we might restructure that program. If that's the takeaway, that we're looking at new models broadly defined and MOOCs are just a tool in that toolkit, that's, I think, a good thing. But you guys have heard too much from me today. I'd be interested in my other 3 colleagues here, what they think are the chief takeaways from today.
One thing I've heard a lot, and heard it first from what you said initially, Houston, was the need to set students up for success. I think that's really a concern for everybody that's had a speaking part today and everybody I've heard in the breakout sessions, and I think that this is another way to do that. Someone said technology isn't the point. The point is, how can we take some of the new things that are available to us now and make it possible to have more Georgians succeed at attaining meaningful credentials? I really think that's been kind of at the forefront of discussions.
I think for me, there's a lot of square pegs that we're trying to fit into round holes as we're talking about these innovations. And so part of the challenge is figuring out which things work with which programs, which students, and which institutions. And the big challenge, I think, is figuring out how do you do that without completely starting from scratch, because most places aren't going to have the luxury to build brand new learning management systems, student information management systems. We've all got to play in the world of accreditation and federal financial aid regulations and state financial aid. So I think for me, there's a lot of different ideas out there, and figuring out which ones make sense, and then how do we adapt them to what we already do so that we don't throw everything out and start over from scratch is the big takeaway. Now, how you do that, I don't know.
Can I just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I've heard a lot also about the importance of professional training and professional development, not only for faculty, but also for staff and professionals within the institutions. I think that's going to be critical to what Van was just talking about.
I just wanted to ask folks if you had any other questions for the funders in particular, because I think this is a really good opportunity you have here where you have someone from EDUCAUSE, which is housing the main education technology program that's been looking at this. And you've got another representative from the Gates Foundation, which is the world's largest private grant-making foundation, spending upwards of $500 million on higher education reform. So what questions do you have for the funders? Nothing?
One question I have is what projects that you've seen now, having looked at many of these, that you no longer have any faith in? That is to say, you're interested in all of these new projects, but there are a lot of things you may be seeing by now that's like, this is not really going to work.
What was yesterday's
or
meeting?
scale, or something along those lines.
Yeah, so I mean, just based on the presentations today, it doesn't have the level of evaluation or outcome that I would jump to a snap judgment on saying, no, we wouldn't fund that. I mean, I think the things we heard all made sense, and from a qualitative perspective, say, well, that makes sense a lot rationally, and if we're getting student outcomes and moving towards the agenda, there aren't necessarily things I would take off of my slate from that perspective. I mean, we're pretty data-driven. As Nancy knows, when we look at the evaluations in Vanna as well, it is a bit of a measure twice, cut once situation where we want to get a sense, and it's not just here. There's some pilots that have taken place in other states that we can say, hey, these actually look pretty similar in a different context, and we may find out some of the contexts they've been tested in Georgia may not work for a certain population. It may work in another one, so it doesn't mean we necessarily throw that out.
But just to follow up, because I think that's a really good question, and beyond just what you heard here in Georgia, I mean, it seems like Gates and EDUCAUSE have taken the approach of funding a huge range of different strategies, right? You're going at open educational resources and MOOCs and competency education and gaming and what have you. I mean, at this point now that you've been spending money on this for a few years, are there some, not particular universities projects without naming names, but just some general approaches to these issues that you've concluded are not as interesting or effective as they may have seemed at first?
I guess one thing I'd say, and I alluded to this before, and I don't think it means that we haven't learned valuable lessons about the individual level of tools and processes that were funded in Wave 1, but I think just we've made a statement that's implicit in the move to fund full degree programs, rather than simply a small approach or a process change or a new technology tool.
Seems like piecemeal doesn't.
So that's
work as
a
well.
move that I think we've made, and I think we made it in part because we saw the need, and in part because sometimes it's easier to do something more radical.
Do you
in a
think we'll
sense.
see more of that, I mean, going down the line? Full degree program funding?
I think it is really hard to say what we'll see more of going down the line.
I don't think that's too far of a stretch in terms of, I think I look at it a little bit more of a portfolio shift as opposed to we're taking certain things completely off the plate. One of the areas, let me articulate that, is if you think about a lot of the investments that Gates Foundation in particular has made over the past 5 years, a lot of it early stage catalytic, let's see what's working, let's test them in a bunch of different situations. We are actually, and some of this will come out during the year through different evaluation studies, we're actually seeing pretty promising results in areas and saying, okay, now can we apply that in different situations? What if you weave a few of those together in an institutional context? So what if you took some developmental education programs you're seeing in this area, map them with some of the pathways which take you past that developmental education and put those together live? How does that change practice in an institution? And then you start getting a little bit more towards scale. So I'd say if you were looking at kind of our portfolio, we're starting to take some of these things a little bit further through the pipeline.
So the idea is sort of making individual campuses kind of a laboratory for various interventions at one place.
I think yes. Well, and it's not just campuses, and Art knows this as well because he just recently sent out a request for information. It's thinking about the systems perspective, and so there's been a lot of conversation today about systemness and what does the system offer. And so we are looking at this at institutions and what kind of innovations can be threaded together there, but also what kind of systems could play that together.
Do you think Georgia could play such a role?
I mean, Georgia, have they put in some information to date? I don't know. We're like a few days into it. I think so. Look, I think there's dedication, obviously, of the early stage things. It's just a question, is there the commitment to play that through the system and go to the next level?
Any other questions in particular for the funders that are on folks' minds?
One comment just to close on that, the question before, what you take back. I think one of the most powerful things is to get the taxonomy right internally. A lot of the discussions today have been MOOCs and tech and all this, and I just, and I think to the degree that the system has something where we say, when we say MOOC, we mean X. When we say this, I think, and some of the stuff Houston, you sent beforehand, I think was really helpful with that, so you can take that back to the campuses, because without that, the conversations are going to go right past each other all day long.
MOOC almost has no meaning anymore the way it's being used.
It's
sometimes.
also sort of an ugly word.
New models. That's what we keep saying.
Well, I think we're almost out of time, so is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question on any other topic? If not, we'll wrap up.
Okay, thank you so much.